Okay, so once again I have the diagram for the money market. You can see that this is the downward sloping demand curve for money. These are the vertical money supply curves. Now we know that in case of expansionary monetary policy, the money supply really has to increase. There has to be an increase in the supply of money. So MS has to go up in case of expansionary monetary policy, and for an increase in MS, you know, Fed or the central bank has to buy the T-bills or the government bonds from citizens, right? So this curve is going to move right every time the Fed buys the T-bills, and the quantity of money in the economy will be increasing every time. It's going to go up every time, right? Every time it increases. Now at the same time, for every increase in money supply, please note that there will be a decrease in the rate of interest. So the rate of interest is going to go down, and as a result of that you will have interest rate effect, right? So your I is going to go up and your C is going to go up, so your AD is going to go up and your real GDP is going to go up, right? So that is something that you will see here in your ADAS model. All that will show here. This is what I have been telling you. Okay, so as soon as this rate of interest keeps falling, this AD curve will start moving towards the right. As you can see, the AD goes up, so the AD curve will keep moving to the right with every increase in supply of money and every fall in the rate of interest, and that will continue until the AD curve goes there, right, to something like that, and that gap in the economy, that recessionary gap, gets bridged. The economy comes to a long run equilibrium and goes to its potential. Now if this gap is super large, right, for example, if you have something like this in the economy, if you have a situation in the economy where this gap is super large, the recessionary gap is very big, you can see that this is a huge gap. So in that case, the any increase in money supply is not able to bridge the gap completely. Your AD curve moves rightward, but you know, it's still not able to reach the long run equilibrium, because when you have a situation like that, as the money supply keeps increasing, you can see the rate of interest will keep falling. Every time the rate of interest will keep falling, but there will eventually be a time when this rate of interest becomes stagnant. The rate of interest does not drop anymore. In other words, the rate of interest hits a floor. It cannot go down anymore. The rate of interest R cannot go down anymore. When the recessionary gap is super big, every time the money supply is increasing, the aggregate demand keeps moving a little bit towards the right, but it is not enough to remove the entire gap. And in the meantime, a situation comes in the economy when, even though you are increasing the supply of money, that rate of interest is not changing. That rate of interest has become unchanged or constant. It has hit a floor. This situation is known as liquidity trap. When the rate of interest in the economy does not change, even when the money supply in the economy increases, is known as liquidity trap. I repeat, liquidity trap is a situation in an economy when any increase in supply of money does not decrease the rate of interest. In other words, whenever the economy is in a liquidity trap, this expansionary monetary policy does not work anymore. the expansionary monetary policy does not work. So we can say that in a liquidity trap, the monetary policy is ineffective. In case of a liquidity trap, the monetary policy becomes ineffective. This whole mechanism becomes ineffective, and this is also known as neutrality of money. So in the liquidity trap, the money becomes neutral and monetary policy becomes ineffective in case of a liquidity trap. So let me kind of summarize this. So whenever there is expansionary monetary policy, money supply increases, rate of interest goes down, and the interest rate effect kicks in, so that aggregate demand goes up, real GDP goes up, as you see in this figure. But if the gap is super high, if the recessionary gap is too large, then after some subsequent increases in the money supply and the shift of the AD curve, the gap does not close in, the gap does not wipe out completely. And in that situation, if the money supply increases further, then the economy comes to a situation such that that increase in supply of money does not reduce the rate of interest anymore. In other words, the rate of interest in the economy becomes constant at a very low level, and it hits a floor. This situation is called a liquidity trap. And in a liquidity trap, this money supply does not work anymore, so all this shift of the aggregate demand curve does not happen anymore. This interest rate effect does not work anymore, so monetary policy becomes ineffective, or in other words, money becomes neutral in the economy. So you can see with this how fiscal and monetary policy are both aimed towards closing in the gap in the economy. Whenever there is a recessionary gap, expansionary policies are necessary. Whenever there is a inflationary gap, the contractionary policies are necessary. And if you reverse them, if you do an expansionary policy in an inflationary gap and the other way around, then the situation in the economy will further aggravate, which means the output gap will become bigger, and that is not a desirable thing for the economy. Now with this, we have come to the end of module 4. I hope with the 4 modules you now have an understanding of micro and macroeconomics and how the two are connected.